and I'm here today to talk to you about Gartner's top trends in hyperautomation and what you need to know about the future of automation. So let me kick off a little bit of an introduction to myself. I work in the Gartner software engineering team. I cover business process automation, decision automation, and hyperautomation, as well as other software development platforms. It's an honor to be here to talk to you and to have listened into a really interesting FlowFest today. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Moving on to what Gartner thinks about hyperautomation and business process automation, etc. Let's see what we want to talk about. Hyperautomation, per Gartner's definition, is a business-driven, disciplined approach that involves the orchestrated use of multiple technologies to identify, vet, or analyze, and automate business processes. So it's the whole selection of automation across your business and using multiple different technologies. We used to describe this as rapid delivery, but that tends to be viewed as much more tactical, and we're seeing hyperautomation being applied in a much more strategic way in a lot of organizations now. And these technologies can vary. We've got not only traditional business process automation, which is where we mostly consider Flowable, but also things like task automation with RPA, robotic process automation. We've got intelligent document processing, integration platforms increasingly being used for automation by business technologists, for example. Low-code application platforms for point solutions as part of your processes. Of course, this also extends to the analysis and task and process mining tasks, and leads up to things like decision automation, also augmented user experiences through things like generative AI and chat interfaces. The interesting thing that we found in our research is that hyperautomation business analysts and business technologists on average use more than 2 technologies. So we're seeing the rise effectively of hyperautomation specialists in organizations who aren't just process engineers, but they're also doing, for example, business process automation plus the forms design, or they're doing, for example, case management design and case automation, as well as process automation. So it's interesting to see this aspect from an organizational point of view, where people in the business and organizations actually building applications and automations are often dealing with multiple different technologies and indeed vendors. In terms of our trends, from a Gartner perspective, we view automation and hyperautomation as part of the general low-code aspect. From a software and IT perspective, model-driven development using things like BPMN comes under the low-code moniker, even if I might have professional developers doing it through BPMN and calling themselves process engineers. It's still part of the overall low-code world. And we have some particular perspectives on trends in low-code. We see, of course, this supporting what we call democratization, enabling especially our business technologists in the organization to build and develop systems, create automations, etc. So a lot of the technology development is going around, improving the ability for business technologists who are part-time developers, if you like, to build systems. And I think the cloud modeling tool that Flowable has talked about today is really interesting there. This is part of this general trend to enable technology to be more accessible. Composability is another trend. We see organizations still investing huge amounts of money in terms of building their back-end systems, buying complex services like CRM, ERP, etc. And frankly, organizations aren't looking to rip those out or throw them away anytime soon, but you still need to build applications on those systems of record and systems. So what we're seeing here is this rise of composability and access to things like Salesforce. And again, we've heard that today in the Flowable sessions as to what Flowable is doing here. Making it easy to access other systems and bring them into your processes. The important thing from an IT perspective is that this is, the bottom line here is application programming interfaces being created and delivered by your SaaS and by your internal teams. The next trend we see from and remember this is from a low-code perspective, is professional productivity. So the professionals in the organization are becoming much less concerned about being tainted with the idea of doing low code or BPMN or something. They're looking more and more to use the tool appropriate for the task, whether that's user interface design and building, general application development, or of course, workflows. So we've seen an uptick in organizations, professional developer teams looking to see where they can exploit low-code and model-driven solutions. And then, of course, we also have hyperautomation as one of our core low-code trends. So all of these effectively overlap and combine together. We're seeing hyperautomation being driven by democratization. We're seeing composability, access to external systems and internal systems, and of course the requirement for professionals to interact. I have systems of record, complex databases and services, which all need to be included in my business processes. But we do also have some particular perspectives on hyperautomation trends. So on the democratization aspect, that aligns to fusion teams. I mentioned about IT teams using things like BPMN. What we're seeing is IT teams especially interested in technologies that support the business that, for example, are open source and support standards. Exactly what we heard on the keynote today from Flowable. This comes up from, in some of the Gartner's biggest clients as to what they need in their organizations moving forward. Standards provides not just sort of like, a nice thing for vendors to do. It enables them to have reduced skill requirements and training requirements. It allows them to assess easily the staff to deploy on particular projects and to assess them internally. So that standards aspect and the fusion of IT and business working together on projects is neatly handled by modern process technologies like Flowable. And then we've got composability. So effectively integration has been, everybody's been doing integration for a very long time. But in hyperautomation, in fact, the Gartner view on hyperautomation is that this kicked off really with the huge explosion in interest in task automation through robotic process automation. And of course, that is a type of integration. You're typically solving swivel chair integration, where I'm reading information from one screen and typing it in another. Very interestingly, what we found is that organizations were spending more and more on RPA script development and maintenance, and should instead have been considering wider process automation to solve that, especially with modern process tools. So composability and integration is something that is continuing to evolve and become more and more interesting. Standards we've already discussed. BPMN, we're very impressed that Flowable continues to support CMMN, the case management standard, and also DMN for decisioning. These are effectively, you can view, if you have a really optimistic perspective, the next thing after Java and C#. Now, we don't see BPMN replacing things like Java and C# anytime soon, but it certainly augments those languages. And then finally, agility and agile delivery. So, the fact that I can build out processes very quickly, and I can test them quickly, and I can deploy them quickly. And we saw that with the SaaS announcements, on the FlowFest today. Again, very interesting. Again, something we see from Gartner's key clients, the need not only for open source, but also for ease of deployment through SaaS. So having that delivery model is really important to businesses to get their speed of delivery up, as well as the speed of development, and those developer services for being able to analyze your processes, be able to deploy them quickly, and of course get them to work with your underlying data sources and systems and services. So those are our hyperautomation trends. I want to drill down into a little bit more detail on these. First of all, in terms of fusion teams, this is really around the collaboration between IT and business technologists. And the really interesting thing here is how many business technologists there are in organizations. And Gartner started this research, founded initial surveys in 2020, so 3 years ago. But these surveys have been repeated. This is still valid data. And the interesting thing is that these business technologists, you can view as a step away from being business analysts. Having access to process design tools, etc., is exactly what these business technologists want and need. And of course, I may be relying on my technologists and IT departments to do final wiring to databases and things like that. But nonetheless, the availability of these business technologists is key to organizations. In fact, it's more important than the numbers here actually indicate. My colleagues in the CIO research teams at Gartner were telling me a few weeks ago that actually it's also a quarter of the technology end users in their organization are wannabe business technologists. So they feel they have the skills and have the desire to be doing more development in their organizations. So this ends up as being a huge opportunity. It also drives the need for more and more governance of tooling, of course, but nonetheless, it's itself a very interesting opportunity. In terms of the platforms we see being used by fusion teams, and especially these low-code hyperautomation sort of technologies, they are hugely diverse. We see not only best-of-breed tools like Flowable around business process automation. We see specific tools, decision management systems for decision automation. We see, of course, the task-oriented RPA, intelligent document processing. Some of the business process automation tied to content automation and integration, of course. A lot of integration tools are targeting the automation developers now. Of course, low-code application platforms for things like user interfaces and databases, citizen development. Some of the low-code application platforms have particular specializations. You'll see things like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Oracle appearing as low-code application platforms for extending those SaaS services. There's even some low-code platforms dealing with service creation now, so creating microservices or graph databases or things like that. We also have user interface-oriented tools like rapid mobile application development tools and rapid web development tools and things like that. So a huge variety of low-code technologies. At Gartner, we're tracking roughly 700 vendors in these. And the interesting thing of as I said, the ones which have this open source and standards and growth and SaaS coverage, those are the ones which are really interesting. And some of these are indeed becoming commoditized. You'll find, for example, the robotic process automation market, most of the big vendors there have pretty much been acquired by things like the SaaS vendors. On integration, there's very much a switch towards supporting the business technologist. Things like decision automation becoming an increasingly popular discussion point for Gartner clients covering business process automation. What do I do next in terms of improving and optimizing my business? So those are the sorts of technologies we deal with for fusion teams. Now let's move on to composability. So this is really all about exploiting those APIs. My enterprise architects may be modeling what my capabilities are that I need in the organization through business capability models. My organizations will be either building those out or deciding to buy them, or indeed reusing them, or maybe even outsourcing the build to external systems integrators. And then the idea is that these capabilities, and they tend to be long-lived. I can then catalog, and then use a process composition tools to actually access and exploit them. And of course, this creates applications, workflows, and general automations. So this has been an ongoing trend for a long time. We've seen availability of SaaS services, for example, with APIs now for a long time. But this sort of like separation of concerns is really interesting. There's a general trend to consider these back-end services as things that my software development teams code up in conventional software technologies, but the process of building on top of those is really an automation task, something that my automation teams and hyperautomation teams would be interested in doing. And there's an interesting caveat here as well, is that my business process automation teams and my integration teams, as part of their process compositions, may end up creating new APIs. And we see this already. I don't need to be a software engineer to build an API. I might rely on IT to publish an API, but this cycle approach of actually being able to compose new components for other team members to use is really interesting. And especially in a heterogeneous world, obviously within a single tool like Flowable, I can have sub-processes which can be shared, but having that ability to share those for other tool users is really interesting. One interesting data point came out really recently. We just done a cloud end user behavior survey, and I thought it was really interesting to point out some of the results here. And I've picked out 3 results. One of the questions was, agree with statement A versus agree with statement B, and one of them was software delivery model is product centric versus project centric. Product-centric tends to be, what Gartner recommends, but especially for your application developers, whereas projects tend to be more, automation-focused. Then the question, and notice the difference there. We've got 43% product-centric versus 40% project-centric. And then there's the build versus buy for develop our own custom applications, 42%. Versus 40% doing, so 40% prefer to acquire components. And then typically when we speak to those organizations, although they claim they don't do software development, they're actually doing automation on top of those bought applications, again, using that composability model. So they quite often will describe their process engineering team, or process automation team, or hyperautomation team as, no, that's not the software development team, that's simply our business automation team. And then the third metric here was, we measure our time to deploy, develop and deploy a new version of the custom application in months, 41%, versus in days, which is also 41%. Now, what I'm not saying is that there's a correlation between all these respondents. I don't have access to the source data to this yet. It's nice, it'd be convenient to think that actually all of these align, and in fact, it's the same people who are product-centric, develop own custom applications and measure their delivery in months versus the opposite. But I can't claim that. But it is very interesting to see, and this, again, is another data point that this is really probably the difference between, my build versus automation teams. But the other interesting point is that my business process automation delivery sits across these, again, because of the need for enterprise workflows being core to businesses, and therefore likely to be very interesting to IT teams, plus being delivered and encouraged by business technologists, and delivered by automation teams. So we see business process automation technologies like Flowable, crossing this divide, being used for both, long-term, maybe, long-running development projects, which are business critical, but, especially also interesting to these more tactical applications as well. So that's build versus buy. Now let's move on to standards for these professional developers. There's an interesting aspect here, which is that, and again, when we speak to professional development teams, are definitely, aligned to the idea of coding their problems. We say, well, look, the abstraction levels for software development have continually risen since the world of computers was started off. And there's no reason to think that will stop in things like Java or C# or even with the language frameworks like Spring and .NET and things like that. And one view of that is that the standards like BPMN, the visual definition standards like BPMN and DMN and CMMN, simply are the next levels of standardized development. And as I said, we do see organizations exploiting these on top of their existing investments in 3GL backend services, and especially backend services. It's quite interesting. We see at Gartner, we have an architecture model we call mesh of app and service architecture, where we talk about multi-experience based on APIs, based on services. And most of our low-code discussions are focused on exploiting low-code for the user interface. But we see also, this business process layer acting as the orchestrator for businesses, the orchestrator of the work in organizations, the orchestration of the tasks going on as part of your overall delivery of business and value to your customers. So BPMN is certainly very significant. It's also true that all these components and model-driven process services, other low-code services, don't live in silos. So, as we said at the beginning, business technologists are using at least two technologies. It's very common for us to see these being brought together. So it's very common for us to see, of course, business process automation tools like Flowable being built on top of or accessing services like ERP and CRM. But we also see, if I have to deliver a specialist user interface for customer-facing applications, to layer a multi-experience or mobile application development platform calling into my processes, or indeed, of course, calling out, and as we heard in the keynote today for Flowable, calling out from my business process to things like decision services or intelligent document processing or RPA or other task services. So we don't have a monoculture perspective with these hyperautomation technologies or low-code technologies. They can be used and are used successfully altogether. Now, what about agility? So we have a hyperautomation reference architecture at Gartner, which we've been developing. It's really more draft at this stage. We haven't published research on this, but we have presented it at conferences, where we talk about, business processes being, one of the key aspects of organizations and organizing business work. And of course, business process automation technology is our term for the technology stacks handling those business processes. And of course, beyond that, I'm typically dealing with decision automation, and beyond that, combining decisions and processes in case handling and casework. And we're getting a lot of discussions with Gartner clients on both casework and process work, and intermediary decision discussions as well. But it's quite interesting. Of course, all of these are based on data services of some kind. And invariably, there is some data involved. We see very little still event-driven business processes using business process technology yet. It's still early days, I think, for that. But there's also lots of specialist tooling we are seeing being applied here. such as, for example, process mining, delivering guidance on business process design, of course, supporting those processes with task automation and integrations, and of course, front-ending them with front ends like from digital experience platforms, multi-experience development platforms, general low-code application platforms, and of course, feeding in analytics and BI. So I have a lot of agility in these technologies, and all of these low-code technologies tend themselves to be very agile and deliver solutions very quickly. Interesting enough, of course, we get onto the subject of Gen AI and their support for business processes and businesses in general, and the support of large language models for business process automation development is something we're seeing more and more of. It's very interesting to see this. Probably within the next 6 to 12 months, we'll see some significant case studies in this area. And it's important to note from an AI perspective, the rise of technology in general being available to organizations, not just business technologists growing in organizations, but access to technology is happening much faster. ChatGPT got to 1 million users within 5 days, which is an incredible sort of like indication of how accessible technology is today. And this is something which we expect more and more of. It's going to provide more and more work for vendors like Flowable to keep up with what's going on here and to serve all the desire for new technologies for businesses. Another interesting point, we expect by, within the next 2 years, 70% of new internally developed applications will incorporate AI or machine language-based models. And this isn't probably not too surprising. We will either be having Gen AI helping the development, or we'll be having AI ML-based decisioning, etc., supported, and we already see this happening in organizations. So this is really interesting this is where business process automation technology is at the sharp edge of progress. And I'd like to finish off on the AI discussion with something which is quite interesting. At Gartner, we've introduced this idea of an augment, where if an AI capability is deployed that boosts worker capabilities beyond average, we call that an augment. And we expect that these augments built through generative AI will effectively collapse the skill gap for knowledge workers within the coming 5 years. So a huge change in business operations is likely. And this can, you can view this in 2 ways. If I'm a process engineer using Flowable, this is going to make my life much easier. But at the same time, it's going to mean that the business processes that I'm modeling will become probably more commoditized as well. So anyway, we're coming up to the end of our half hour. Just to recap, we have some mainstream low-code trends around democratization, composability, professional productivity, and hyperautomation. And hyperautomation, we're especially seeing fusion team support, integration as part of my automations, standards, and agility as the key sort of trend factors and the key things you need to be aware of. So just to recap as to the interesting discussions we've seen today at FlowFest, workflows run businesses. So business process automation technology is core technology for a lot of organizations. Business process engineering is something that can be done by business technologists, but it also involves professionals. This is where the fusion team aspect comes in. My modular, low-code and model-driven business processes also encourage agility and speed of development. We have at Gartner this concept of the minimum viable process. I don't need to apply that just to Java and C# development. For example, I can build minimum viable processes as part of my development methodology with my business teams. And then skill standardization and tool integration through BPMN is helping drive the adoption of process and the acceptance of process. And then finally, one of the things we're seeing with this hyperautomation perspective is how strategic enterprise workflows and processes and tactical hyperautomation processes are beginning to coexist. So I can start exploiting my mainstream processes, for example, which may be delivered through API, and exploit them in more tactical situations as well. Deliver more process automation, more automation, which leads to more efficient businesses. And that concludes their discussion on the hyperautomation trends. And thank you very much indeed for your time. And thank you very much as well for our hosts at FlowFest for a really interesting conference. Thank you.